Before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to mention the passing of Robert A. Wells, the owner of Cabbage Key. I met Mr. Wells on my first trip south, which was also my first solo cruise, and he was kind enough to give me some good advice, even though he seemed to think I was a little crazy, which shows you how perceptive he was. I will miss seeing him having an afternoon beverage in the corner of the bar when I'd arrive for a layover, or having a chat with him at breakfast. I'm sure Cabbage Key will continue to be ably managed by my friend Ken Wells, Mr. Wells' son, and that my friend Robert Wells, Jr. will continue to manage the also beautiful Tarpon Lodge across the Sound. I'll put a picture of me and Mr. Wells in the show notes for this episode. Meanwhile, fair winds, Mr. Wells. You were one of a kind. In this episode, I have another realization about how long it takes to get somewhere in a sailboat.
Somehow, we didn't make it to the beach.
Learn a How Not to Sail 101 lesson about using my eyes.
It was outside the channel. I looked over there and the water didn't look good to me visually.
And barely avoid disaster in Bradenton, although we don't know that yet.
As we're backing in, you got almost in the pier and you put it in forward just so that it would almost kiss the dock, but not quite. But it didn't do that.
So, last time my friend Jay and I managed to finally get the boat out of my marina and motor sail down to Marina Jack in Sarasota with the usual kind of adventures you can hear about in episode 58.
We did a good job of coming in, but it was one of those things that, it was getting darker. Not dark, but about to be dark soon.
And now we had us a nice 192 square foot floating accommodation for us and the Admiral while she finished up a job in Sarasota.
So I would just get dropped off at the marina each afternoon.
The question was, once Tanya's gig wrapped up, did we want to try to make a long dash south to Cabbage Key, ass early on Thursday, or maybe just head south a few miles to Venice? Either way, we were going to have a long leg back to my marina, which we needed to be back at least by Saturday. And my marina is at least 16 hours north of Cabbage Key and 10 hours north of Venice. And that's if the wind and waves are favorable and we can go close to hull speed in the Gulf of Mexico. I think I mentioned in episode 22, Oh Brother, Here Art Thou, that one thing I've learned over the last decade is to bring a little realism into my cruise planning. Being out on the water all day, let alone the ocean, can leave you thinking you've been gently massaged by a 2x4. Especially if you get greedy. So here's what I was thinking. If we wanted to aim for Cabbage Key, we'd need to leave Sarasota at something like 4 a.m. on Thursday to arrive there by happy hour while the dockmaster was still there, and then we'd have one day to hang out before casting off again at midnight to hopefully arrive back at the marina without incident Saturday afternoon. Does that sound like fun to you? Maybe so. But particularly just after taking the boat out for the first time in months and having hastily repaired a few things, I was not too keen on such a marathon. I also considered just hopping south about 15 miles on the ICW to Venice and getting a slip at Crow's Nest Marina there, if one was available. But I was starting to wonder about that as well. What finally helped make my decision was the Admiral.
You promised to take me to my favorite beach.
Whitney Beach is at the north end of Longboat Key, not very far from where Jay and I had scraped the bottom on our way south. And it's the Admiral's favorite beach, in the U.S. at least. And the one request I always get when the Admiral comes down to the boat is,
I want to go to Whitney Beach.
So I made an executive decision. We'd go a few hours north to Bradenton and stay at Twin Dolphin Marina with their nice pool and restaurants nearby, giving us a reasonable day sail back to my marina the next day, and giving us enough time to stop on the way at Longboat and let the Admiral have some beach time. What could possibly go wrong? How Not to Sail, sponsored this episode by our awesome Patreon patrons like Captain Dougie, and by the great books, swag, and general mayhem at bobbitchin.com, and of course by the book How Not to Sail, which, like everything else How Not to Sail, you can find at, say it with me, hownottosail.com. While pondering our next hop, there are worse places to be than Sarasota.
This is a beautiful place to go sailing.
Jay has spent plenty of time in Sarasota, so he was familiar.
I had a sailboat at the Sarasota Sailing Squadron and sailed up and down the west coast of Florida.
The marina there, called Marina Jack, is pretty swank.
What do you think the first vessel is down there? About 100 feet?
I think 100 plus.
Yeah, 100 plus feet. And the one next to it's about 10 feet shorter. Beautiful boats all the way down. Very nice.
And there are 3 restaurants right at the marina, as well as O'Leary's Tiki Hut on the far side of the basin, which we hit up for breakfast every morning.
Bacon, egg, and cheese croissant from the little shop there.
There's a mooring field out in front of the marina, which I would definitely consider using if I were by myself and had a dinghy at the moment. But this time, especially since the Admiral needed to get to and from a job Monday through Wednesday, we treated ourselves to the luxury of being able to walk down the dock to food and showers and somebody else's bathroom, which we didn't need to pump out. After our mad dash down to Sarasota on Monday, Jay and I were planning to day sail out of the marina on Tuesday, which we didn't do because we were kind of tired and the wind was weak, and then on Wednesday, which we also didn't do. We were having plenty of fun just hanging out, and we did manage to give the boat a scrub, which it badly needed. And on Thursday morning, we prepared to set out north for Longboat Key and Bradenton.
We'll sail up to Mar Vista, have lunch, go out to the beach, and then come back and then head further north up near Bradenton and stop at the Twin Dolphins.
While fueling up and pumping out, we made a discovery about the fuel dock at Marina Jack that Jay and I both thought was a little strange.
The fuel dock there is open 24 hours, and it's self-pay. And I talked to them. I said, this is kind of strange. He says, no, it's open 24 hours, and you just put in your credit card, and, just like you would at a filling station. And I said, I don't know, have y'all had any problems with, people spilling fuel or something malfunctioning?
So, yeah, that does seem weird. Or maybe we misunderstood about the 24-hour thing, although the attendant seemed pretty sure about it. But finally, after we went through the painfully slow fueling process on my vessel, Jay and the Admiral and I were headed north up Sarasota Bay on the first leg of our cruise, with all of us actually aboard and with all of our mistakes behind us. I'm sure you realize how silly that idea is, that all our mistakes were behind us. But before we find out how I'm wrong again this time, this seems like a great time to thank our awesome Patreon patrons, like Captain Dougie. Hope everything's going your way, Captain. And Jimmy and Sandra, hope you kids are having fun on your adventure. And to remind you that you can help keep How Not to Sail afloat for as little as $3 a month by joining the How Not to Sail Patreon crew. You can find out more at hownottosail.com/Patreon. But as with everything else How Not to Sail, just go to hownottosail.com and you're sure to find it there. Speaking of which, don't forget to check out the show notes for this episode, which, as always, you can find at hownottosail.com/the episode number. So in this case, hownottosail.com/59, where I should have some photos from this very trip. But meanwhile, I believe we were sailing north toward Bradenton. So you'd think that we'd already made enough mistakes on the way down to Sarasota that we'd be good to go now on our way north. Heck, you'd think that after neglecting to check how long it takes to get to Sarasota, that I'd be very careful in my route planning this time. To be fair, I did actually lay out our route on the chart plotter and estimate the transit time, but by the time we got to the north end of Sarasota Bay, one thing became clear. If we stopped at Longboat for the Admiral to go to Whitney Beach, she'd have a 3-mile round-trip walk in order to spend about 15 minutes at the beach, since we needed to get to Twin Dolphin Marina before they closed. So it was with great reluctance that I broke the news to the Admiral.
You said we wouldn't be able to go, but you'd make sure to take me the next day.
But the bad news wasn't done. At first, I thought we could swing back by the north end of Longboat Key the next day, after we left Bradenton. But after looking at that route, Longboat was clearly out of the way and would make for a very long day. So I made a backup plan with the Admiral.
You said you'd drive me to the beach when we got back to the marina.
Which I kinda finally did, but that's another story. Meanwhile, I figure I've got my big mistake of the day out of the way, right? All we gotta do now is get through the Cortez and Anna Maria drawbridges, head north a couple of miles into Tampa Bay, and then bear right up into the Manatee River for a few miles to Bradenton. I forget which drawbridge it was, but I decided I wanted to put the mainsail down, which was flogging, because of course we were motor sailing into the wind. And it's here that I got reacquainted with a little lesson from How Not to Sail 101. The chart plotter is always right, so don't bother staying in the channel or looking at the watercolor. Yeah, Stevie Wonder can see what's coming next. I was tacking back and forth across the channel waiting for the bridge to open. I had the engine on, but in neutral, just in case we needed it. So I steered over into the left side of the little bay, outside the markers, and tried to give the helm to Jay so I could go forward and take down the main. But it seems like Jay was having a bit of a flashback to his Navy days. You see, one time Jay was at the helm of a large ship off the coast of Vietnam.
Each ship was given a quadrant in Vietnam to gunfire, and the ship next to us would encroach on our quadrant, and it was at night.
And his captain ordered a maneuver that Jay knew was not going to end well.
The captain said, "Come right." And I said, "Well, they always come left, and they encroach into our thing." He said, "Well, we're well within our quadrant." I said, "Yeah, but they're going to come in this way." And he got kind of miffed and said, "I said to come right, so you can relieve yourself."
So Jay gave control of the helm back to the captain.
And we went right, and the other ship did what I thought they were going to do. They went left, and we came right toward them, and they came toward us, and we both had to back down. And we didn't hit each other, but came close to it. But unfortunately, we were actually in a combat situation, and we were receiving fire.
So we were not under fire as I got ready to douse the main, but there were some other similarities. You see, Jay seemed to think that the watercolor over in the port side of the channel looked pretty shallow.
It was outside the channel. I looked over there, and the water didn't look good to me visually.
And he did not want to be at the helm as we ran aground.
I said, "I'm not going to take that helm here. You want to go there, you'll have to take it over there."
Of course, I was sure we had some room. I mean, the chart plotter showed 8 feet. Yeah, we ran aground.
We bumped the ground again, which made me happy that I wasn't at the helm when that happened.
I immediately went into hard reverse and backed out of the sandy bottom, managing not to back over the 2 crab pots near our stern. I don't think Jay immediately realized at first that we'd actually run aground, but the Admiral recognized the sensation right away. I guess she's had some practice. Frankly, I forget what happened with the sail. I assume I took it down at some point, and as is not uncommon when we're on a schedule, I think we probably motored most of the way up Anna Maria Sound and then up the Manatee River. Twin Dolphin Marina, sailing vessel JC Sails.
Captain hailing Twin Dolphin Marina. Please switch and talk on 7272.
So, with 2 how not to sail moments under my belt, there was only the docking to deal with. Just letting you know we're coming up to 1-5.
Copy that. Hail me again at 22. It'll be much clearer.
The entrance to Twin Dolphin Marina in Bradenton is a little weird. First, the channel takes you from the middle of the Manatee River all the way over to the North Shore before heading straight back across the river to the marina, the entrance of which is nigh unto invisible straight on. You head straight toward Pier 22 Restaurant, and finally, when you get right up on it, you turn into a narrow fairway tucked behind the seawall. All of this we did and made our way to our slip to back in. So I can't tell you how many times I have to keep reminding myself that a river has its own current. For some reason, I keep finding myself saying, "Gosh, the tide is running strong today." But irregardless, as my friend Bill would say, the current makes for a little extra pucker factor, especially if you're backing into the slip. I didn't get the angle right the first time, so I aborted that pass and tried again. And again. I ended up making 2 standing turns in between vessels much more expensive than mine before getting the stern set up to back in. A standing turn in a sailboat with an inboard engine is a wondrous thing when executed properly. Due to the phenomenon of prop walk, you can basically keep the helm to starboard and alternate bursts of reverse with bits of forward power and pretty much turn the boat around on its axis, assuming the wind and current aren't too strong. No, don't worry. After a couple of standing turns, I got the stern lined up and made almost the perfect docking. I say almost because just as we were 3/4 of the way backed perfectly into the slip, I went to give it one last bit of forward.
You got almost end the pier and you put it in forward just so that it would almost kiss the dock, but not quite. But it didn't do that.
So instead of a beautiful, perfect landing,
Kind of like bumped into the dock.
and left a nice black mark on the stern, which I suppose is better than bouncing off a raggedy-ass dock with bolts sticking out or something.
So we were sitting there thinking, how did that happen?
Being kind of tired and glad to get tied up to a dock where we could walk to get some dinner, we didn't think too much about the fact that I'd put the vessel in forward right there at the last and it didn't respond. In fact, it didn't remotely occur to me that on the very last attempted bit of forward power with the engine, that the prop might have fallen off. Be sure and join me on Friday, May 17th as we find out exactly why we lost engine power right there at the dock, and maybe manage to make our way back to my marina. Maybe not. We'll see. So I wanted to start a new coconut telegraph segment here in the outro of the podcast, which I haven't quite got fleshed out yet, but let me go ahead and read an email I got from our friend Bryant, who hosts the Upper Chesapeake Sailing Group on Facebook, who says he's a big fan of How Not to Sail. And Bryant says, I have a good friend, John Jennings, who's turning 85 May 3rd. He's been sailing most of his life. His boat is a Catalina 30 named Tally Ho. I want to get him a shirt and your book. Do you think you could get it autographed from you? So it turns out I don't have any shirts on hand. I have to get them just like you guys from the How Not to Sail store, which is actually fulfilled by Teespring. But I did send along an autographed book, which hopefully didn't reduce the value too much. And a happy birthday to the legend, John Jennings. And thank you, Bryant, for listening. Don't forget, you can hit me up anytime at bradford@hownottosail.com or leave a message on the How Not to Sailor hotline. And I'll have more of those to share coming up. Speaking of hotline, I did mention it's about time for an end-of-season online party for the end of Season 3, which I'll start cobbling together as soon as I hear the first 2 folks leave me a message on the hotline saying, yes, we want to party. Last time it was Carrie Granger, Tad Klopsick, and Buck Hopper who got the ball rolling. So who will it be this time? Just leave me a message at 770-458-3838 with your name and saying something about wanting to party. And not only will I begin the begin, but I will also play those messages in one of the upcoming episodes. Again, it's 770-458-3838. Or just go to hownottosail.com/hotline if you forget the number, or if you're currently jogging or driving a semi or something. Thanks as always to our awesome Patreon patrons, and thank you for listening and telling a friend. Check out the show notes at hownottosail.com/59 for photos from this episode. Heck, I might even add a map later if I get crazy with it. Meanwhile, try to keep your stern from bumping, and I'll see you next time on How Not to Sail. Screwing up is part of cruising. Let me show you how. So, the one request I always get when the Admiral comes down to the boat is,
I want to go to the beach.